I don't know, it's just weird, right? Like, I don't know. Planet Eclipse have been making paintball guns for a long time. They first started out by tweaking and kind of just customizing autocockers. But then in 2005, they released their first like ground up paintball gun, the Ego. And then following with the success of the Ego, they released their first spool valve guns, the Geo. And this Geo 4 is Planet Eclipse's 6th high-end spool valve gun. There was first the Geo 1, Geo 2, Geo 3, CS1, CS2, and then now the Geo 4. Over the years though, Planet Eclipse kind of have done some rolling updates to those guns though. So say for example, the Geo 3.5, Planet Eclipse added the IV core. Or when they updated the CS 1.5, they kind of just wanted to streamline it, reduce the milling, and make the overall gun lighter. But really, I kind of feel like those were just little changes, right? So the Geo 3.5 just kind of added a bolt system, and then the CS1 kind of just streamlined it and made a couple other small tweaks. So they weren't really like, whole gun changes. So most people like myself aren't really calling them complete model changes. So that's why there's kind of just 6 different spool valves. To make things a little bit more confusing too, Planet Eclipse have not stuck with the naming convention or bolt system in those spool valve guns. So when the first Geo was released, I think in 2009, they just called it the Geo 1, because it was the only spool valve gun they had. And then Geo 2, Geo 3, and then all of a sudden, Planet Eclipse called the next Geo the CS1. The CS1 had the same bolt system as the Geo 3.5, the IV core, making it in a way kind of the 4th Geo. But the CS1 incorporated many of the more modern features we're kind of seeing on a lot of the higher end guns today. After the CS1 came out, we saw the CS2, but that had an even newer bolt system in it, the Gamma Core Pro. A design very similar to the 170R or EMAC bolt, and because of that different bolt system, the Gamma Core Pro that's coming in the CS2, a lot of people kind of see like the CS2 separate from that Geo line, separate from the CS1, we're this Geo 4. I've been playing paintball since like 2001, and I never really was a fan of the spool valve guns. I much prefer the simplicity and like reliability of those poppet valve guns. So say like the LV1 or Intimidators, or more recently, I had the G6R. I've had many G6Rs and really liked those guns. And it really wasn't until the Geo 3 came out that I even like looked at or thought about buying a spool valve gun. The 3.1 came out, and then finally that Geo 3.5 came out. I purchased one, and it was the first like spool valve gun that I owned that I thought was as reliable and just as consistent as some of those poppet valve guns like that G6R. So I was very excited and looking forward to the next version of the Geo after the Geo 3.5, which eventually ended up being that CS1. And then the CS1 came out, and overall, the CS1's a fantastic gun. At release, it had some issues, but it really did tick all the boxes and kind of modernize that Geo platform. The only real problem with it is it was freaking huge. For a long time, paintball guns have been really big and heavy. Paintball first started in the 80s. Manufacturing techniques just weren't that good, so stuff was just big and heavy. And as stuff got better, a lot of the manufacturers just made stuff considerably smaller. And over time, I feel like these guns got so small that they were just kind of weird and difficult to hold. So like that Geo 3, it was getting more and more compact. So Planet Eclipse with the CS1 tried to stretch things out a little bit more. Having that longer feel, I think makes it easier to snap shoot, running and shooting is easier, just makes overall holding and maneuvering the gun quite a bit easier. So for me, someone with long arms, having a bigger stretched out gun is typically good, but the CS1 is so big. I feel like they made it a sniper rifle. It's just a very, very long gun. And they also made the grips really large. So just holding the trigger frame was also difficult for a lot of people. If you had small hands, holding the CS1 was pretty difficult. So, myself, I had the 3.5 when the CS1 came out, and I just kind of stuck with my 3.5. It shot well still, but I much preferred the ergonomics of the 3.5 over the CS1. And I bring the CS1 up because I kind of feel like the Geo 4 is kind of what the CS1 should have been. And with the Geo 4, they made that overall feel quite a bit shorter. So technically, the CS1 isn't actually a longer gun. The body's the same length, it's the grip frame angle that makes the gun feel longer. The CS1 grip is at a shallower angle than the Geo 4, so it kind of makes the tank kick a little bit further out the back, giving the whole gun kind of a longer feel. And it really was the main complaint about the CS1. Most people really did not like the overall length. So when the CS2 came out, they kind of made that grip a little bit more vertical, more similar to the previous Planet Eclipse guns. kind of makes the gun feel maybe, I don't know, 2/3 of an inch shorter, something like that. I really do kind of feel that the CS2 overall length though is fantastic. Like I really like the distance between the foregrip and the back of the trigger frame. Having that more vertical trigger frame, I really am a fan of. But I cannot stand the foregrip on the CS2. That like little like taper it has at the bottom, every time I hold it or like squeeze tight or something, I feel like my hand's gonna just like pop or like slide out the bottom or something weird like that. I mean, like I know it's not gonna happen, but it feels like it's going to. So the CS1 had this like crazy like banana hook-shaped foregrip, which I really actually like. I'm a big fan of this foregrip, so I'm very happy that they carried that over and put it on to the Geo 4. Having this kind of angle in the front and like having it a little bit wider at the bottom just kind of makes my hand feel a little bit more stable and like a little bit more secured when I'm holding it over that, you know, CS2 or really even the other Planet Eclipse guns like the 170R. The trigger on the Geo 4 is also a carryover from previous guns. It's really the same trigger that comes on the CS2. I like it and don't like it. I really think it's kind of clever how you can just change the trigger faces on these. So rather than changing the entire trigger, you can just take off the trigger face and just put on a new trigger face. It just makes manufacturing easier. It makes it cheaper to buy new triggers and just kind of easier to change the triggers out. Overall though, I really do not like the trigger on the Geo 4, or really any of the guns that are gonna come with these new triggers from Planet Eclipse. I just don't like the way they feel. They just feel really like mushy and soft when you're comparing them to like the older guns, like say that Geo 3.5 or even the LV 1.6. They have a much more like snappy and quicker and more responsive style trigger. I don't really like the shape. I much prefer the scythe shape, but I really prefer the deuce. I'm a big fan of the deuce trigger. I just don't like these blade triggers. I think for my specific hands, I just like the like different shaped triggers. It's kind of just a preference thing. So there's no question the newer triggers on like the Geo 4 and that CS2 are much lighter weight. So technically, in theory, you know, having a lighter weight trigger should make pulling the trigger and then the trigger returning a little bit easier. But it just doesn't feel good, right? I feel like the heavier, more solid triggers, when you're pulling them and releasing them, just kind of feel a little bit nicer. And I mean, we're not talking like crazy heavy triggers. I mean, we're talking like a few grams heavier here and there, kind of give it more of a solid, satisfying feel when I pull the trigger. So I really kind of think that the heavier triggers on the older guns feel a little bit better. And with the Geo 4, the trigger actually stops in the front. So if you pull the trigger hard, you can actually bend the trigger, which is definitely not something you can do on the older guns. And I think that that like bending kind of just helps give it that mushy, soft feeling. The easiest way to kind of like demonstrate that, I think, with not actually having, you know, actually feeling it physically for yourself, is you can kind of hear it, right? When we pull the trigger really hard and like satisfying on like this LV 1.6, you can hear that really like crisp, like tick of the gun, right? You can hear it when it hits that aluminum. And with the Geo 4, it's just this like like duddy, like soft sound. Yeah, I just don't like it. That's like the easiest way I think to compare those. On the inside of there though, one of the more unique things about the Geo 4 or the Planet Eclipse guns is that you actually get an option to use an optical sensor or the micro switch. I prefer having that micro switch as it provides like actual physical feedback so you know the gun's shooting. You get that like mouse click or whatever when you're shooting the gun. The optical switch though, you can give it like a clean feeling so you can have the micro switch not activate at all. So when the trigger passes through this little plane area, the gun knows when to fire. It's just a kind of unique feature to a lot of the Planet Eclipse guns. Ever since Planet Eclipse went with that totally hoseless, air transfer tubeless design with the CS1, they actually relocated the regulator to the trigger frame. And they've done the same thing with the Geo 4. So the regulator and changing the velocity is all done on the bottom of the trigger frame or right through that pops on off. And like all high-end guns, it's going to come with many of the standard features, right? It's going to come with all the electronic firing modes we're going to want. It's going to have that very nice LCD screen on the back. You do get the pops on off from Planet Eclipse to allow you to just kind of turn the air on and off really quick. You're getting a very good lever feed neck. They're extremely good shaft barrel kit. It's going to come with all those standard good, high-end features. And that IV core bolt system that comes in the Geo 4 is very good, right? It's extremely reliable, capable of shooting really the most fragile paintballs. It's very air efficient. It's just fantastic, and you really can't get a better bolt system. That IV core was first introduced in the GSL, a limited edition version of the Geo 3.5, then was carried over to the CS1. With the CS1, they actually increased the volume of air that the bolt uses, making it shoot a little bit lower pressure, and then they carried that volume expansion over into that Geo 4. So the Geo 4 is going to shoot very, very similar to the CS1. The only really difference is that angle in the trigger frame, technically, might make it kick a little bit different. And then if you kind of like to tweak and tune stuff a little bit more, the Geo 4 is actually going to come with the SFR, the Solenoid Flow Restrictor, something unique to the Geo line that you're not going to actually find in the CS2. The Solenoid Flow Restrictor controls the exhaust flow from the bolt through the solenoid. Adjusting the SFR will change the speed of the bolt's forward stroke. So essentially that just means, you turn the FSR up and then the bolt moves forward faster. So that's kind of good for two things, right? So say if you lower the bolt speed, lowering that bolt speeds kind of give the gun a little bit smoother and gentler shot as the bolt's just, moving slower, so it's just gentler. That slower moving bolt also contacts the paintball a lot gentler, making it break a little bit less paint. So say if you have really, really fragile paintballs, lowering that bolt speed could help you break a little less paint. And then increasing that bolt speed, the bolt's going to move a little bit quicker. So you could break paint, but having that bolt move a little bit quicker can kind of help in cold conditions. So if it's really, really cold outside, that grease doesn't work as well, O-rings get a little funky. So turning that FSR up could help kind of overcome really cold or adverse conditions. So having that there just kind of allows you to tweak the way the gun shoots a little bit, and then also kind of allows you to adapt the gun maybe to certain conditions or paint conditions. I myself, though, I never really use this thing, right? I mean, it's 70 degrees outside pretty much all the time. And I use, fairly decent paint all the time. So I find myself playing in perfect conditions with kind of perfect paint all the time. So like I had the Geo 3.5 and like I have now the Geo 4, I don't really ever mess with the things. So you might find it useful, you might not. I don't. And if you do have paint breaking for some reason, taking off that trigger frame and just kind of cleaning out everything is very easy. So there's just two main frame screws like most paintball guns, and there's actually a pin in the front of this that helps hold the trigger frame to the top of the body. So when the CS1 was released, it had a very similar setup to this, but there was no pin in the front of there. So they actually found that the foregrip would actually cause the trigger frame to bend. So they updated the CS1 very quickly and kind of took care of all those customers. So really it's kind of hard to find a CS1 with that old messed up trigger frame now, but now all the Geo 4s have that pin in there to just kind of like really reinforce that front frame. And you can see there's no wires that connect the body to the trigger frame, just those contact points in the back, just like the CS1. The only wires are going to be the eye wires going to the back of the body, and then the main board connecting to the batteries in that front foregrip. And the Geo 4 does have those like traditional wired style eyes, whereas the CS2 kind of has this updated top board that has the eyes integrated into it with Planet Eclipse's new light pipe design. I really like the light pipe design. It kind of makes the eyes a little bit easier to see through broken paint. But again, I don't have broken paint problems. So I am fine with these like traditional, normal style eyes. And like all the Planet Eclipse guns in the past, the Geo 4 is, fantastic. I mean, the build quality is the best. There's not a manufacturer out there who can provide an overall build quality and package paintball gun better than Planet Eclipse. I mean, everything's good about them, right? The screws are good, the rubber's good, the body matches up good together, the electronics are all good, the manual's good, the warranty is great. Everything they provide is just fantastic. The only thing I don't like that Planet Eclipse is still doing is shipping these old cases. So the Geo 4 and that LV 1.6 that I reviewed recently come with their old aluminum cases. I really think that these guns that are over even $800 at this point should really come with nicer cases. Most of the manufacturers, Shockers, the Luxes, the Dye Guns, they're all coming with these nicer soft cases that just to allow you to hold a little bit more stuff than the Planet Eclipse cases. So I don't like the cases. I just wish they would come with better cases or bags or I don't know, something. Normally at the end of these videos, I kind of like to give like an overall, should you buy this? We'll compare it to some other guns. And trying to do that and like formulate my thoughts with the Geo 4 and compare it to like the LV 1.6 from Planet Eclipse or compare it to the other gun from Eclipse, the CS2, I don't know. It's just weird, right? Like, I don't know. Who knows what you should do? You know, looking at the CS2, I mean, the thing's almost $400 more, and it's like, I don't know. It's not really that much different. I mean, the CS2 has a different bolt. You get the light pipe. You technically get more barrels, if that matters. I mean, you get one more barrel back. But for $400 something more dollars, it's definitely not worth it. I mean, I don't see at this point why someone would buy the CS2. I mean, if you really, really like that gamma core bolt, go for it, I guess. I don't know. It's just weird. And then the LV one from Planet Eclipse is going to be very near this Geo 4 price. But it's old, right? I mean, it's still got the air transfer pipe. It's a gun that was really made almost 10 years ago now. So Planet Eclipse just have this weirdness going on, right? I mean, they have the CS2, which they're calling their high-end gun, but was released like 3 years ago. And then now you have the Geo 4, which was released like a year ago, but it's like below the CS2 in price and performance, I guess they say technically. And then we have the LV 1.6 that's like 10 years old, but was just released like a year ago. It's just so confusing. You know, if I was in the market for a high-end paintball gun at this point, the Geo 4 is the best gun you can buy, I think, in 2021, and will probably continue to be that way at least until the end of this year. I know that I'm keeping mine for a long time. Yeah. I don't know. It's just confusing.